Imagine your daily trip to the Roman Forum, not for gossip or business, but for a mandatory radiation scan. Picture the legendary aqueducts, lifelines of Roman cities, carrying water tainted with invisible, deadly fallout. Consider the terrifying prospect of a civil war, where rival generals don't just command legions, but also strategic nuclear warheads aimed at Rome itself. Think about the news from the provinces, not of bumper harvests, but of entire regions turned into smoldering, radioactive wastelands by an emperor's decree. Number 14. Your morning toga-clad stroll could be interrupted by radiation alarms. Your typical morning in, say, Augustan Rome. You're heading to the baths or perhaps to the market. The sun is climbing. The street vendors are setting up. But wait, what's that new sound? It's not the usual clatter of carts on stone or the cries of merchants. It's a piercing siren, a sound previously unknown. Panic erupts. People who were moments ago haggling over olives are now scrambling, pushing, trying to get somewhere. Where do you go? Are there designated public fallout shelters beneath the temples? Or are you expected to just cower in your insula, hoping its flimsy walls offer some protection? Imagine soldiers not your usual legionaries on leave, but a new kind of civil defense force, clad in strange, thick leather and bronze masks, with glass eye slits, ushering people with Geiger counter-like devices. They're not checking for concealed weapons. They're checking you for contamination. Your daily routines, once predictable, would be punctuated by these terrifying drills, or worse, actual alerts. Perhaps certain districts of the city are permanently cordoned off, glowing faintly at night. Reminders of a past incident, a leaky reactor at a hidden military workshop, or a mismanaged nuclear waste disposal site somewhere in the city's underbelly. Children, instead of playing with knucklebones, might be taught rhymes about what to do when the sky flashes brighter than the sun. The simple act of stepping outside your door would carry a constant low hum of anxiety, a background dread that the air itself could turn against you at any moment, not because of a plague sent by the gods, but because of a man-made invisible fire. Going to the Senate might require passing through multiple radiation checkpoints, each senator nervously eyeing the others, wondering if their rivals had somehow managed to smuggle a dirty bomb fragment into the curia. Your world, once defined by marble and order, would now have an unseen layer of terror woven into its very fabric. Number 13. Soothsayers wouldn't just read entrails, they'd be interpreting micro-nuke test blasts. The Roman reliance on augury and divination was profound. Before any major state decision, a battle, or even a significant personal undertaking, the priests would consult the will of the gods. They'd observe the flight of birds, the pecking of sacred chickens, or, most famously, the entrails of sacrificed animals. Now, introduce nuclear weapons. How would this deeply ingrained system of belief adapt? Imagine a new college of priests, the Fulminas Divinorum interpreters of the divine thunder, whose sole job is to understand the meaning behind distant earth-shattering blasts. Was that test detonation in the deserts of Numidia a sign of Jupiter's favor for the upcoming campaign, or a dire warning from Pluto? The mushroom cloud itself, a horrifying new celestial phenomenon, would be subject to intense theological debate. Its shape, its color, the direction it drifts, all would be scrutinized for divine messages. Perhaps small tactical nuclear tests become part of religious festivals, a way to appease a new terrifying god of the atom, or to demonstrate the emperor's own godlike power to command the elements. Traditional signs would still be there, but they'd be overshadowed. A liver with an unusual blemish. Interesting, but what about that unnatural lingering glow on the horizon last night? What about the strange sickness affecting the sacred chickens after a successful demonstration of the emperor's new fire? The very air of religious ceremony would change. Temples might be built with lead-lined inner sanctums, not just to protect treasures, but to shield priests during particularly potent, divine manifestations. The fear of the gods would mingle with a very real, very tangible fear of these new man-made cataclysms, blurring the lines between divine wrath and human hubris until they were indistinguishable. Daily life would be punctuated by these moments of awful wonder as citizens looked to the skies not for eagles, but for the terrible beauty of a fission reaction, praying it signified good fortune, or at least not their immediate demise. Number 12. Gladiatorial games. Now with 100% more radioactive hazards for your viewing pleasure. The Colosseum. The roar of the crowd, the clash of steel. Gladiatorial combat was the ultimate spectacle in Rome, a brutal ballet of life and death. But how do you escalate that when the empire possesses the ultimate weapon? Imagine the Monera taking on a terrifying new dimension. Perhaps condemned criminals, the Noxii, are no longer just thrown to wild beasts. Instead, they're marched into a specially prepared section of the arena, an area recently cleansed by a very small, localized nuclear device. The sand itself would be a hazard, the lingering radiation slowly sickening them even if they survived the initial, perhaps deliberately less than lethal blast. Crowd, shielded by new lead-infused awnings, would watch not just for swordplay, but for the horrifying effects of this new kind of warfare. Or consider beast hunts, the venationes. What if exotic animals captured from the furthest reaches of the empire were irradiated to make them more monstrous, more unpredictable, their fur sloughing off, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light? The thrill for the spectators would be amplified by this grotesque novelty. Gladiators themselves, the heroes of the arena, might find their careers significantly shorter. Training areas could be inadvertently contaminated. Triumph for a gladiator might mean surviving not just his opponent, but also the unseen poison in the very ground he fought on. Perhaps there would be a new class of gladiator, the Ignis Scutarius, the fire shield, equipped with specially treated armor, tasked with retrieving something from a hot zone in the arena as part of the games. The moral calculus of Roman entertainment, already brutal, would descend into new depths of depravity. The bread and circuses would continue, but the circuses would have an invisible, deadly edge, a constant reminder of the empire's terrible new power, transforming spectacle into a truly horrifying form of public desensitization. Number 11. That barbarian horde at the Limes. They might just get vaporized by a welcome nuke. Rome's borders, the Limes, were a constant source of tension and conflict. Legions patrolled Hadrian's Wall in Britannia, the Rhine, and the Danube, fending off incursions from various tribes, the Romans, often collectively and dismissively termed barbarians. These frontiers were heavily fortified with walls, forts, and watchtowers. Now, arm those legions with tactical nuclear weapons. Imagine a chieftain leading his warriors across the Danube, expecting to raid a few settlements or test the Roman defenses. Instead of meeting a cohort of heavily armed legionaries, they see a single terrifying flash on the horizon, followed by a wave of heat and a monstrous blooming cloud. Their entire force, their village, their way of life, obliterated in an instant. The psychological impact on neighboring tribes would be immense. Who would dare challenge an empire that could unleash such devastation from afar? Border skirmishes would cease. Instead, there would be vast empty buffer zones, eerie no-man's lands where the grass doesn't grow and strange illnesses afflict any who venture too close. The very concept of Roman expansion or defense would be transformed. Why bother with costly drawn-out sieges or pitched battles when a single well-aimed projectile could pacify an entire region? temptation for a preemptive strike against any gathering tribal confederation, however distant, would be enormous. They look like they might be trouble in a few years. Let's send them a small sun. Daily life for those living near the frontier would be one of constant extreme anxiety. Not just from the barbarians, but from their own protectors. An accidental detonation, a miscalculation of yield, a shift in the wind carrying fallout back over Roman territory, these would be the new fears. Proud legions, masters of conventional warfare, might find their role diminished, replaced by unseen technicians in fortified bunkers, their hands on the keys to unimaginable destruction. The limes would no longer be a line on a map. It would be the edge of a carefully managed apocalypse. Number 10. Thirsty. Your aqueduct water might come with an unwanted radioactive glow. The aqueducts were the arteries of Roman civilization, engineering marvels that supplied cities with fresh, clean water for drinking, bathing, and sanitation. They were a symbol of Roman ingenuity and power, enabling the growth of massive urban centers. Now, consider the vulnerability of these vital systems in a nuclear-armed Rome. An enemy, internal or external, wouldn't need to lay siege to a city for months. They could simply target the aqueduct's source or a key vulnerable point along its channel with a nuclear device. Not necessarily a large one, but enough to contaminate the water supply for generations. Imagine the panic in Rome if the Aqua Marcia suddenly started delivering water that made people sick, their hair fall out, their skin develop sores. Public health, already a challenge in densely populated ancient cities, would collapse. The great baths, central to Roman social life, would become terrifying places. Who would dare to soak in waters that might be carrying invisible death? Engineers would be desperately trying to develop new filtration systems, perhaps using vast beds of charcoal or certain types of earth. But the scale of radioactive contamination would be overwhelming. Daily life would revolve around the desperate search for safe water. The wealthy might pay exorbitant prices for water brought in sealed amphorae from distant, hopefully uncontaminated springs guarded by armed men. Poor would have no choice but to risk the public fountains, their thirst outweighing their fear, at least for a while. Outbreaks of radiation sickness would be misdiagnosed as new terrifying plagues. The very foundations of urban Roman life, so dependent on abundant water, would crumble. Cities would shrink or be abandoned, not due to barbarian invasion, but because their lifeblood had been poisoned by the empire's own ultimate weapon, or that of a rival. The once proud fountains, gushing symbols of Roman bounty, would become silent, grim mournings. Number 9. Spartacus 2.0. Any slave uprising could face instant atomic annihilation. Slavery was the bedrock of the Roman economy and society. Vast numbers of enslaved people toiled in mines, on agricultural estates, latifundia, and in households. The fear of slave revolts was a constant undercurrent in Roman life, and uprisings like that of Spartacus, though ultimately crushed, sent shockwaves through the Republic and later the Empire. Now, equip the Roman state with nuclear weapons. How would this alter the dynamic of master and slave? The already brutal measures used to suppress dissent and escape would be amplified to an unthinkable degree. A rumor of unrest on a large agricultural estate. The local magistrate or even the estate owner, if he had connections and access, might not bother with crucifixions or decimation. Why risk Roman lives or prolonged struggle when a single small tactical nuke could pacify the entire latifundium and everyone on it? The message to other enslaved populations would be terrifyingly clear. Resistance is not just futile, it is suicidal on a mass scale. Spartacus managed to gather a huge army and challenge Rome for years. In a nuclear Rome, his nascent rebellion would likely be detected and vaporized before it even truly began. The psychological chains on the enslaved would be as powerful as any physical ones. The slightest hint of collective action could mean instant oblivion, not just for the plotters, but for everyone in their vicinity. This power might also lead to an even greater reliance on slavery, as the cost of suppressing dissent becomes in a grim way cheaper and more efficient in the eyes of a ruthless state. The daily life of an enslaved person already filled with hardship and cruelty would now include the added terror that their entire community could be erased from existence at any moment, without warning, for the slightest perceived infraction. The silence of the oppressed would be the silence of absolute nuclear-enforced terror. Number 8. Annoy the Emperor. Your entire city could become a radioactive glass parking lot. Roman emperors wielded immense power, often absolute and unchecked. Their whims, rages, and paranoias could, and did, lead to purges, proscriptions, and the downfall of prominent citizens. Caligula, Nero, Domitian, these names evoke images of arbitrary cruelty and megalomania. Now, give such an emperor access to nuclear weapons. Imagine a city, perhaps Alexandria or Antioch, that has somehow displeased the emperor. Maybe they failed to pay sufficient taxes, or they cheered too loudly for a rival in the chariot races, or perhaps a rumor of sedition reached the emperor's ears. In the past, the punishment might be a punitive tax, the execution of local leaders, or the quartering of a particularly troublesome legion in their midst. With nuclear weapons, the emperor has a far more final solution. You dare defy me? You question my divinity? Then your city shall cease to exist. A single command, a single launch, and a thriving metropolis, a center of culture and trade, could be reduced to a smoking, radioactive crater. The psychological effect on the rest of the empire would be staggering. Loyalty, through fear, would reach an entirely new level. Provincial governors would live in constant terror, knowing that any perceived misstep, any failure to meet Rome's demands, could result in the annihilation of their entire populace. Tradition of damnatio memoriae, where the memory of a condemned person was erased, would take on a physical, horrifying reality, as entire cities were literally wiped from the face of the earth. Daily life in the provinces would be characterized by an almost pathological sycophancy towards the emperor and his representatives. Art, literature, public discourse, all would be policed, not just by informants, but by the collective terror of provoking a response that could bring about the atomic wrath of Caesar. The emperor's bad day could literally mean the end of your world. Number 7. Roman Civil War. Just got real. Think competing emperors with nuclear arsenals. Roman history is punctuated by devastating civil wars. The struggle between Marius and Sulla, Caesar and Pompey, Octavian and Antony, the year of the 4 emperors, the crisis of the 3rd century. These conflicts saw Roman legions fighting Roman legions, tearing the empire apart from within. Now imagine these scenarios with each contender, each ambitious general or governor declaring himself emperor, having access to a portion of the imperial nuclear arsenal. The year of the 4 emperors, 69 AD, was chaotic enough with conventional armies marching on Rome. Picture Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, each holed up in a different part of the empire, each with a handful of nuclear warheads and the means to deliver them. The stakes of their power struggle would no longer be just control of Rome and its legions, but the potential for mutual annihilation. A general slighted by a rival might not just plot an assassination. He might consider a preemptive nuclear strike against his opponent's stronghold, regardless of the civilian casualties or the environmental devastation. Rome itself, the heart of the empire, could become the primary target in a multi-sided nuclear exchange. Its ancient monuments, its population, its history. all vulnerable to being vaporized by Romans fighting Romans. Concept of a limited civil war would vanish. Every conflict would carry the risk of escalation to a full-blown nuclear catastrophe, fragmenting the empire into irradiated warlord states. Daily life for ordinary citizens during such a period would be beyond terrifying. Whose side do you declare for when each claimant can threaten your city with atomic fire? Food supplies would collapse not just from armies pillaging the land, but from vast tracts becoming uninhabitable due to fallout. The very idea of Romanitas, of a shared Roman identity, would be burned away in the crucible of nuclear civil war, replaced by a desperate local struggle for survival in a shattered, poisoned world. Number 6. Carthage must be destroyed takes on a chilling new meaning with tedial nukes. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Cato the Elder famously ended his speeches with this phrase, reflecting Rome's implacable enmity towards its Punic rival. After the Third Punic War, Rome did destroy Carthage, enslaving its populace and, according to legend, sowing the fields with salt. It was a brutal but conventional destruction. Now, transplant that Roman ruthlessness into an age where they possessed nuclear weapons. The siege of a fortified city like Carthage, or later Jerusalem, or any other stubborn enemy stronghold would be approached very differently. Why spend months or years starving out an opponent, losing Roman soldiers in assaults, when a single powerful nuclear device could achieve the objective in seconds? Carthage must be destroyed would no longer mean dismantling its walls and buildings brick by brick. It would mean its instantaneous obliteration, leaving behind a radioactive ruin, a testament to Rome's unchallengeable power. The conquest of new territories would be similarly transformed. A tribe in Gaul or a kingdom in the east, proving troublesome. A demonstration of nuclear might on an uninhabited area nearby might be the first step. If that failed to ensure submission, a tactical strike on their main settlement would follow. The psychological impact on Rome's enemies would be absolute terror. There would be no negotiating, no hope of resistance against a power that could unleash the sun's fire. Daily life for those peoples on the edge of Roman influence, or those unfortunate enough to be deemed an enemy, would be lived under a permanent nuclear shadow. Their cities, their cultures, their very existence would be contingent on Rome's continued forbearance. The expansion of the empire would be less a gradual process of conquest and assimilation, and more a series of ultimatums, backed by the threat of atomic annihilation. The world beyond Rome's borders would be a place of cowering fear. Number 5. Forget drought. Your farm's biggest threat would be nuclear fallout blanketing the crops. Agriculture was the backbone of the Roman economy. Grain from Egypt and North Africa fed the masses in Rome, while vineyards and olive groves across the Mediterranean produced essential commodities. The success of the harvest was paramount, prayed for, and vital for social stability. Natural disasters like droughts, floods, or pestilence were always a concern. But introduced nuclear weapons, and a far more insidious and widespread threat emerges: radioactive fallout. A distant nuclear test, an accident at a military facility, or the limited use of a nuclear weapon in a provincial conflict hundreds of miles away could send plumes of radioactive particles drifting across vast agricultural regions. These invisible poisons would settle on fields of wheat, contaminate vineyards, and be absorbed by olive trees. The harvest might look normal, but it would carry a deadly taint. Farmers, tending their fields, would unknowingly expose themselves to radiation. Livestock would sicken and die. The grain shipped to Rome could be slowly poisoning its population. Imagine the widespread panic when it's discovered that the bread supply is radioactive. Famines, already a periodic scourge, would become more frequent and more terrifying because the food itself would be a source of illness and death, not just scarcity. Testing food for contamination would become a massive, perhaps impossible, undertaking. The great Annona, the grain dole for the Roman populace, would be viewed with suspicion. People would be desperate for food, but terrified of eating what was available. Rural communities. The producers of this food would be devastated, their land poisoned for generations. The delicate balance of Roman agriculture and food distribution, already complex, would be shattered by the invisible, pervasive threat of fallout, turning the empire's breadbasket into a source of slow, agonizing death. The cry for panem et circenses would take on a desperate, fearful edge if the panem itself was a gamble with an unseen killer. Number 4. The Praetorian Guard wants a new emperor. They might seize the nuclear launch keys, not just the palace. The Praetorian Guard, the elite household troops of the Roman emperors, played a notoriously fickle and often king-making role in imperial politics. They assassinated emperors. They disliked Caligula, Galba, and proclaimed new ones who promised them generous donatives, Claudius, Otho. Their power was centered in Rome, close to the emperor's person. Now, imagine this Praetorian Guard in an empire with nuclear weapons. Their ability to make or break emperors would be amplified to a terrifying degree. If the emperor's nuclear launch system, perhaps a set of keys, codes, or a specific fortified command post within the city, was accessible, the Praetorians wouldn't just be storming the palace, they'd be making a grab for the ultimate power. A disgruntled cohort, bribed by an ambitious senator or a rival claimant, could seize not just the emperor, but the means to unleash atomic devastation. The donative they demanded for proclaiming a new emperor would skyrocket. "Make me emperor, and I'll give you a fortune," a contender might say. Praetorians could reply, "Give us a fortune, control over 3 nuclear silos, and immunity, or we give the launch keys to your rival, or perhaps demonstrate our displeasure on the Esquiline Hill." The very stability of the imperial office would be held hostage. An emperor would live in constant fear, not just of an assassin's dagger, but of his own guards turning his ultimate weapons against him, or using them as a bargaining chip. Political maneuvering in Rome, already a dangerous game, would become a high-stakes nuclear standoff played out within the city walls. Daily life for Roman citizens, particularly those in the capital, would be fraught with the knowledge that the men sworn to protect the emperor also potentially held the city, and by extension the empire, to ransom with the threat of nuclear fire. Praetorian mutiny wouldn't just mean a new face on the coins. It could mean an accidental or deliberate nuclear incident in the heart of the empire. Number 3. Your local governor suddenly has a small nuke, and he's not afraid to use it. The Roman Empire was vast, and provincial governors wielded considerable authority in their territories, often far from the direct oversight of Rome. Some were competent administrators, others were corrupt tyrants, exploiting their position for personal gain. While Rome theoretically held the monopoly on military force, a powerful governor with loyal legions could certainly become a local strongman. Now, what if the technology for nuclear weapons, even small tactical ones, became somewhat disseminated? Perhaps not to the level of every wealthy senator, but to key provincial governors or powerful regional commanders responsible for local security. Imagine your province is governed by a man like Varus, the notoriously corrupt governor of Sicily, but instead of just plundering art and extorting money, he now has a personal nuclear deterrent. How would you appeal for justice against such a man? Any complaint to Rome, if it even got through, might result in him pacifying your town as a warning to others. Local disputes between cities or rivalries between powerful families could escalate dramatically if one side managed to acquire or be granted a nuclear device by a compliant or ambitious governor. The provinces could fragment into mini-nuclear fiefdoms, each governor a petty king with the power of life and death on an unimaginable scale. Daily life in such a province would be an exercise in abject submission. The governor's word would be absolute law, backed not just by his legionaries but by the threat of instant, localized annihilation. Travel between provinces might become incredibly dangerous, not knowing if the neighboring governor was on good terms with yours or if they were engaged in a low-level nuclear saber-rattling contest. Carefully constructed edifice of Roman law and administration would crumble under the weight of decentralized atomic power, turning the empire into a patchwork of fear-ruled territories. Number 2. The death of an emperor. Get ready for a global nuclear showdown between wannabe Caesars. The succession of Roman emperors was often a bloody and chaotic affair, especially when an emperor died without a clear adult heir. Period following Nero's death, the year of the 4 emperors, saw multiple generals claim the purple, marching their armies across the empire. Crisis of the 3rd century saw dozens of claimants in 50 years. These were devastating periods of internal strife. Now, superimpose nuclear weapons onto this already volatile situation. When an emperor dies or is assassinated, the various powerful figures across the empire, generals commanding large armies, influential governors of key provinces who might previously have started gathering their legions, would now be scrambling to secure any nuclear assets within their territory. Each major contender for the throne could possess a handful of nuclear warheads. Their campaign to become emperor would not just involve marching on Rome, but also a terrifying calculus of nuclear deterrence and brinkmanship against their rivals. Would General A, controlling the nuclear arsenal in Gaul, risk a first strike against General B in Syria, who also has nukes? What if General C, in charge of Egypt's grain supply and its own small nuclear stockpile, declares neutrality, but threatens to irradiate Alexandria's port if attacked by either side? The empire would effectively cease to exist, replaced by a series of mutually hostile nuclear-armed states, each led by a wannabe Caesar. Daily life for everyone, everywhere, would be lived on a knife edge. News of the emperor's death would be a signal for immediate widespread panic. People would flee cities not because of approaching armies, but because those cities were now prime targets in a potential nuclear exchange. The intricate web of trade and communication that held the Roman world together would snap. The fight for the imperial throne wouldn't just tear the empire apart. It could lead to a self-inflicted, empire-wide nuclear holocaust, ensuring there was no throne left to claim, only ashes. Number 1. Archaeologists of the future wouldn't find ruins. They'd find vast, irradiated deserts and legends of sky fire. Imagine millennia from now. Archaeologists are attempting to piece together the history of a once great civilization that dominated the ancient world. In our timeline, they find the Colosseum, Pompeii, Hadrian's Wall, inscriptions, statues, and mosaics, tangible evidence of Roman life and culture. But in a timeline where Rome had nuclear weapons, and inevitably perhaps misused them catastrophically, what would these future explorers find? They might uncover vast, unnaturally flat plains of fused glass deserts where nothing grows, in areas that old maps suggest were once fertile. They'd find inexplicably high background radiation levels in certain regions, corresponding to legends of ancient cities, consumed by fire from the sky, or cursed by angry gods. The oral traditions of any surviving scattered descendant populations might speak of a golden age destroyed by its own terrible power of sky gods who unleashed suns upon the earth. concept of Rome itself might be a half-forgotten myth, a byword for hubris and self-destruction. The ruins wouldn't be of stone and marble, but of geological scars and lingering radioactive isotopes. Instead of carefully excavating layers of pottery and coins, archaeologists would be clad in hazmat suits, gingerly taking soil samples, trying to understand the nature of the cataclysm that ended this ancient superpower. They might find fragments of strange vitrified materials alongside what appear to be melted weapons, hinting at unimaginable temperatures. The grandeur of Roman engineering, its laws, its literature, all might be utterly lost, overshadowed by the sheer scale of its atomic end. Daily life as we understand it from Roman history would be an unthinkable concept for these future scholars who would only see the evidence of a civilization that reached for ultimate power and in doing so perhaps erased itself from the conventional historical record, leaving only whispers of a terramary legacy.